don't know how this is gonna work, but they can't even read meters. But when it comes to the point where things are starting to get back online, do my tenants pay as things come online, or?
I don't think that's your problem because the utilities are in their name right now. They kind of need to deal with the utility company on that.
Thank you.
That would be my guess.
Okay, we're gonna, what we have is we've got a number of the index card questions. What I'm gonna try to do is I'm trying to separate them into categories so that we can kind of approach the topic areas singly. And the one topic area that I'd like to address is, the first overarching question is, how do I figure out rent reduction? And then, so why don't we just sort of do a general piece on that, and then there's some more specific follow-ups that will sort of blend into that, and then we'll return to live questions from folks.
Well, as far as rent reduction, I think it's basically how much of the property you can use or the unit. If some, like the basement is uninhabitable, perhaps the rest of the house can be useful, other parts of it. I think it's just a matter of, well, negotiation and perhaps mediation, but how much of the house is useful.
Okay, and that addresses one question, was what if it was a 4-bedroom condo and one tenant in the basement has to live upstairs? So that seems to jive with that.
I'm gonna chime in just a little bit different, because to go back to the example of the kids living in the basement that now have to live in the living room, because that deprives the two tenants that were living upstairs, it deprives everybody of the use of the living room as well. So it's not just necessarily where they can't sleep, but what parts of the house can't you use as you used to use under the lease before the flood.
Well, and just add one more thing, frankly, if the basement is the only thing flooded, and if it's water or creek water or sewage, frankly, I think it can make the entire house uninhabitable if the contaminants and the contamination sits there for a while. It can grow mold, it can have bad air, and it comes up the stairs, or it's on people's clothes, and so it may not be safe for anyone to stay in the house if the flooding even was limited to the basement. I'm just saying it from the standpoint of health and safety. So.
Okay. And also, it seems we've addressed another question. If rent is paid through the end of the month and is no longer habitable since mid-month, rent could be refunded for the period of time that they haven't been in there. That sounds consistent. Okay.
Yes.
So the other one, which is related to rent reduction, a little bit different, is if the apartment is dry but carpet is removed waiting for the install, is it habitable, and would that result in a rent reduction or not?
Is that where they have removed the carpeting?
It looks like carpet is removed and they're waiting for the install, so is that habitable or not, and would that result in a rent reduction?
Well, they have to do some mold mitigation
Okay.
on the property. That's the next thing. Of course, ventilation. So if that is being done, that's the process they go through.
Okay. And then one other point to make on that is, looking back at the warranty of habitability law, remember it has to be both uninhabitable and has to be dangerous. So if you're looking to use the provisions of the warranty of habitability law, you have to satisfy that second requirement.
I think what that falls under more is what's called, what I term a diminution in value. That it's absolutely, is it habitable? Yes. Is that the value, are you getting the value for what you're paying? No. And so there may be a little rent reduction or the rent abatement for that purpose, because you're not getting the value, but absolutely I think it's habitable. Given the mold remediation.
I even had it come up once where the question was, it doesn't seem fair that we have to live in there without a carpet, but they don't want to put the carpet in yet because they say they need to wait until they're sure that the cement slab is completely dried out. And my response to that was to say, you definitely want to wait until the cement slab is completely dried out. And if that means living on a cement floor for a while, buy a couple of rugs if you need them, but let the floor dry. You don't want them to go and put a carpet in right away and then risk all the mold or whatever other problems you could have. So, again, trying to figure out what, if any, difference in value that makes. It might not even make much, but
Yeah, I think a lot of owners are using these kilts that to put on the basement floors. Home Depot has tons of it. I think that has to be applied to the cement floor after once it's dried, to prevent the mold from coming into that area.
You guys know what kills this?
Yeah.
It's a really, really nasty antifungal, antiseptic paint, basically. To the extent that you can't be in the building when it's been sprayed, because it's growing. It works.
All right, was there anything else on this? Okay. Steve, Karen, you won.
Yeah, thanks, it was very informative. You did answer the questions I had about present month, and I think working with the tenants is the right thing and just prorate. But they stayed in the property. It was a house with a basement, so they moved upstairs. They never did leave, so I'll just have to talk to them about them prorate the month's rent, what we think is fair. The question I have though is, in the future, because you answered, it sounds like I got to negotiate a rent reduction with them, and then when the house becomes whole again, then we go back to the original lease. They want to stay in, so I'm in a good spot there. But what about in the future? Is there like a disclosure on a future lease that I have with future tenants that needs to say there was a flood here and there was remediation done? You know, we had to remove the water and we had it fungicided and molded, demolded and sanitized, and you know, these events happened. Like a lead paint disclosure?
A good question. I don't think there's any law that requires it, but even with that in mind, it's not a bad idea to just tell them about it. It never hurts you to give more information rather than less. My thought.
Okay, and along those lines, the tenant, one of them did have renter's insurance, but it does not pay on a flood is not a payable event. And the same thing with, as a landlord, I have insurance that says loss of income, but the flood is deemed as a non-peril, so they will not pay me loss of income. It's really not good. And when you go to FEMA for help, you're not a homeowner, you're a landlord, so they send you to SBA and they want you to just go ahead and apply for a loan. Yeah, it compounds, so as a landlord, I have to kind of step in and do the management of the remediation and manage things at a lot closer rather than being able to pay the services. But the last question here, because I know you have a lot of people asking questions, can these tenants now, because they didn't leave, I told them to leave, I didn't put it in writing, this is when the water was coming up, and they were out of the house when the basement flooded completely, fortunately, but they had their things, that they've been staying upstairs. We did a real good job to get everything out of the basement in a timely manner. They've got hot water, it's been sanitized, demolded, all that. But can they come back in the out years and say, hey, we were in that house and it flooded, and now I've got like this condition or I've got this trauma. You know, I can't sleep at night. I mean, what, is there something I have to do with them to say, guys, you chose to stay here. I told you to go, but you chose to stay here. And you're here and you're happy and you're living your young lives, and it's gonna be hard getting a job when you graduate, and you gotta find a lawyer and you're gonna come after me. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, people can sue for anything, and there's nothing really you can do about that. But, you know, doing just a real quick analysis, what they would have to show is that there was a harm that they suffered, and you caused the harm, and you could certainly raise the defense that you tried to mitigate those damages by telling them to leave. But try not to keep yourself up at night with those kinds of things.
There's another theory of law called the assumption of risk that might apply also. And what first came to my mind is, did you give them a written notice that said, look, my advice is for you guys to leave, so you have some record of that. But clearly, if they've stayed in a situation where there's a rising floodwaters and it's a impending danger, there's an argument that they have assumed that risk, and therefore you would not be liable for that. That's up to them.
I think it's important that you have qualified people who are doing the work, not the owner or the landlord painting over the sheetrock and
No.
not taking care of things.
I've got receipts, but there is a placard on the house that says
it's in a floodplain, if the water starts coming, get the heck out. That placard's there.
Take a picture of it.
Yeah, okay, documentation. And real quick, the notice that was given to the landlord initially, it was an act of God. So, I mean, that notice was clear when all the water was coming through there, so they're on their 5-day thing now.
Okay, we have a written question that is something that we've heard actually quite a bit out of the mediation service, so I kind of welcome the opportunity to kind of hear the experts weigh in. It's a two-part question, which is, what does a tenant need to do to prove mold, mildew may be a problem for health? Followed by, likewise, how can a landlord prove repairs are adequate to address mold and mildew?
That's a really good question.
What I'm telling people, frankly, is it's not the tenant's opinion, it's not the landlord's opinion. You have to get expert people, and I know that costs money, and that means for both sides. You have to have someone, if it's a landlord, inspect it and say that that mold has been remediated. From the tenant side, you have to have an expert to come in and test the ambient air, the wall space, the studs, and see if there's mold. It just can't be he said, she said. You have to have real live experts tell you if that's true. And so,
Is that the city health department or who?
Maybe so, I hear that
The
there's.
county public health has an indoor quality, the city doesn't do that sort of monitoring, but there's an indoor air quality division. I believe that we have a mold sheet that has those references there. Okay.
Also, FEMA can do inspections on occasion, so
Health inspection, interior.
I thought so, yeah.
they're going into basements. I don't know.
I heard there's such a thing as an environmental hygienist, that somebody that would have the expertise and maybe some credentials that would be available as a professional to do that kind of thing, but I've never actually. That's my response too, though, when somebody comes to me with it, is that, first of all, if you're saying you're really having that kind of a response to a mold problem, can you get something from your doctor saying that that's your problem? But then can you also get something objective from somebody who goes and inspects the mold, who knows what they're looking at, or knows how to test it to back you up on it?
Right, from the landlord's perspective, the key thing is documentation of the efforts that you've undertaken to alleviate the problem. From a tenant's perspective, it's going to be documentation of the harm that you suffered. Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment has some good information on their website. I have this mold information sheet and some other stuff that might give you some more guidance.
Maybe a place to start, I just talked to Steve today about this. There wasn't any visible sign of mold. He said it kind of smelled damp, and the landlord had fans that had been running for about 4 days, so everything sounded good, but he's concerned. Mudokins, Home Depot sells mold test kits from ProLab. They're about 10 to 15 bucks. Certainly not an end-all be-all, but it may be a place to start.
We have someone from county public health here who can.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so I'll do my best answering this question because it's one we're faced with an awful lot as well. So my name's Heath Harmon from Boulder County Public Health, and so I think the biggest challenge that we have right now is the capacity issue. We have one certified industrial hygienist. Most public health agencies have 0. So we are working with mutual aid agreements to try to bring in additional hygienists from other counties to assist with some of this. In addition, I got to tell you, this is also an area where we want to work very closely with our friends at the local city governments as well. So we have established some policies and procedures that are real specific to this flood incident in the city of Longmont, and we're hoping to be able to implement a new protocol, if you will, with the city of Boulder as well. I know that we don't have a lot of trained individuals at the county level or at the city level, so I'm not sure how quickly we can remedy that. But in addition to at least some of those industrial hygienists that we may have on staff or bring in from other localities, there are a number of certified industrial hygienists that are out there that can be brought in still to help with that inspection. I think our biggest message, whether you're a tenant, whether you're a landlord, is really just protecting that health and going through and trying to mitigate that problem as rapidly as possible. I honestly feel like I'm hearing that from all sides, that both parties are really trying to do that as quickly as possible and removing the porous materials like the carpet, the padding, the walls that may have gotten wet. I think the challenge certainly that we're all hearing is capacity. So whether it's to remove it, there's a capacity issue, to dry it out and then get the contractor in, there's a capacity issue, and then also then to have a certified industrial hygienist to come in and just say, hey, this looks good. Most importantly though, the information that we have provided here tonight in terms of that mitigation, that's the process. So whether you're the tenant or the landlord, or just thinking about your own house as the owner, these are the things that we're recommending, and it's removing those wet items as quickly as possible, including that drywall, and cutting that up to a point where you no longer have that saturation. Let that air out, get that air exchange and that ventilation. If you take care of this more immediately and up front, you don't have a long-term hazard, whether you're the tenant, the landlord, or the homeowner. So I think that's our message. And again, there aren't a lot of industrial hygienists. There's not an ongoing stream of these individuals at a county or a city level. But just know that we hear the calls, we're trying to field them, we're bringing in additional support. We'll continue to work with each local municipality to figure out how we improve that capacity as best we can.
When is the right time to bring the industrial hygienist in? Is it right before you want to put the insulation and the drywall on? Do you want to get them in there to make sure that you're safe to insulate drywall in a basement?
Sure. Patty, do you think you could field that question?
Well, I know that he would use a moisture meter to determine the wetness of not as much, maybe even the concrete, but it's more the wood studs.
The studs, yes.
And it needs to be at 15% or less.
Okay.
And I don't know the availability of these moisture meters at this point, but the important part is that it's dried properly before the rebuild.
Before the insulation and
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
Those moisture meters, flooring guys have those. A lot of people have those moisture meters. So 15% is the number one rule.
Yes.
Would that be adequate for flooring as well?
Yes.
Does the landlord have to document that? I mean, just telling the renter,
Wouldn't
the
hurt.
tenant, that, yeah, we checked it, it's under 15%.
It
Does
wouldn't
he have
hurt.
to document it?
It wouldn't
We
hurt.
can make him document
Can I make them document it?
it. Or it's a law, I mean,
I don't know
they
the
can tell you
answer.
anything, well, yeah, it's under 50%.
And that might be more for the legal counsel up here.
Okay.
I think those sorts of good business practices, absolutely, I'd let the tenants know.
Documentation.
Documentation.
Yeah. Which is why it's good that they're recommending professionals clean up, because they will have that documentation.
Exactly.
And I might add, it's when the water is repeated, I don't think we're gonna have another 100-year flood next week. So it's the repeated water issues that create the mold that grows out of control that you don't see. So we can see where the water came from, we can see where we're cleaning it up, and it's a visual thing, it's not hiding behind the wall. So hopefully that helps.
I see a few hands up, and I know that we do have a sign-up sheet, but I just want to know if this is a follow-up pertaining specifically to the mold issue, why don't we take that now so that we can address all those issues kind of at once? And I see Richard.
What right does the landlord have if the tenant doesn't let you go into the unit to tear the carpet out? What right does the landlord have if the tenant doesn't let you go in to tear the carpet out?
What rights
The
do
tenant
the
doesn't-
landlord have if the tenant won't let the landlord in to take the carpet out?
Well, in the, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, there's actually provisions in the warranty of habitability if the tenant's action or inaction prohibits you from making the repairs, they cannot use the warranty of habitability. So, the easy answer is they can't do it.
Yeah, it's a tenant's responsibility to make the area available for the landlord, to make those repairs.
Do you evict him, or what do you do? How do you go about it?
So what is the remedy?
Well, first, I would suggest documenting it, sending them the letter saying it's my understanding that you're not allowing us to come in and remedy the problem. And then after that, you can decide what to do. I suppose, it's up to you, looking at what the condition of the property is. You're also gonna have to take a look at your lease.
Or you can terminate the lease.
Exactly.
Most leases include provisions, I know you guys know this, that say tenant agrees to allow landlord reasonable access or access for purposes of inspection and repairs. If they don't, then, send out a 3-day notice, failure to comply.
Okay, we're just trying to stay focused on mold related, so
I have the opposite issue. I'm a tenant, and my landlady, actually my boyfriend, worked immediately to save the house, save the basement where I was living. And she wants us now that, when it would dry up and stuff, now she's evacuating us. And she's not doing anything to help. She's just saying, you get all your furniture out. But I was down there for 15 minutes today, and I was sneezing and choking, and my lungs hurt a little bit, and I'm not willing to go down there, and I'm not willing to do, it's like I would have been, but it's harming me. And she's not doing anything, and she's saying, you have to get your stuff out before we do anything, but all this stuff is in the middle of the living room, because we dried all the floors and everything, but we knew there was a leak in the wall, and we told her she has to do stuff about it, and she didn't do anything. She's telling us we have to get our furniture out, but, I mean, it's terrible down there.
You wear masks.
This is another mold question.
Was there an answer?
We should try to answer.
Yeah, let's answer her.
I didn't necessarily hear the question.
And I would
Yeah, I
suggest that
did.
you wear
I-
a mask.
Wear a mask.
Wear a mask. Obtain your personal items that you need to get. They're N95 masks, and they have 2 straps on them as opposed to just 1 strap with the painter's masks. And they're inexpensive. You can buy, I think that we looked up the price at Granger. There's packs of 20 for $33, so they're not that expensive. And make sure that it makes it hard to breathe because they're way better than the painter's masks.
And wear gloves.
Absolutely, and gloves. Thank you.
Right, any other mold? Okay, we'll probably do another few questions on this and then move on for the list.
So whoever was talking a few minutes ago, if all the carpets, everything were pulled up immediately and dried immediately and no standing water, if it was dried right away, everything, did someone say that there will be no mold there? You, yes. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to say it that way.
No, after all of the absorbent materials are removed and discarded. So if all of the absorbent materials like the carpeting, the drywall, they need to be taken out and removed.
So just like raised up on a drying rack?
They need to be discarded. If you owned your home, you might choose to lay it out, you might choose to clean it with a scrub brush, with a detergent, lay it out in the sun to dry if you were a homeowner. But in a landlord-tenant issue, it should be removed, especially with the floodwater, because you don't know what was in it.
And I understand discard to mean throw away.
Right.
Thank you. I'm in a position of being a landlord and a tenant, so I have understanding and passion on all sides. I'm wondering, is everything that you're saying also applicable to commercial leases? We're renting in a commercial building that was flooded, and the landlord did not remove the carpet until 9 days after. So the smell is the fumes, I would call, were making it impossible for my staff to work.
Sure, you bring up an excellent point, and I regret that I didn't point out at the beginning of my presentation, the warranty of habitability that we're talking about only relates to residential properties. However, the concept of constructive eviction does relate to commercial property, and the covenant of quiet enjoyment does relate to commercial property. Probably the first place to look is to take a look at your lease.
And there's no way to force him. I mean, we prefer not to go.
Well, it depends on what your lease says. You should take a look at that first. If you want to get the heck out of there and it's uninhabitable, you might be able to just terminate it under constructive eviction if you want to do that. If not, then take a look at the rights and remedies under the lease, and that's going to be what's controlling.
And it might even be negotiated too. I mean, if you explain to the landlord, unless this can be repaired, we're not gonna be able to stay here because it's unworkable. I mean, that might accomplish something.
I just want to get a sense of it here. We're kind of, I think we have a lot of mold questions, and we are sort of going a little bit out of turn from people who signed up. Are we okay, though, with continuing to just sort of address all the mold issues? I just want to get that sense from the group. Is that okay if we?
Can we keep on tenant?
What's that?
Can we keep on tenant and owner issues rather
Okay.
than talking about remediation? I mean, this meeting was really
Okay,
about
that's it.
owner
Okay,
issues.
then we'll do that.
So.
Okay.
Let's move on to the next.
Okay, so next up is Martha Jones.
Here. I have a dear friend who moved to a different property, a restaurant, and they spent a fortune on it, getting it upgraded. And the storm hit, and they didn't know what to do. They started hiring people to get the mud out of the driveways, and a portion of the building where they stored food, refrigerators were ruined, cabinets, food lost, and the sump pump quit working. The entire basement was flooded. And they spent days, they closed for 5 days, and they had workmen getting mud out of the driveways. The question is, what do they do? Do they have to absorb that?
Once again, being a commercial property, you don't have the rights under the warranty of habitability. So what you would have to do is take a look at the terms of the lease. Sometimes it'll talk about what the rights of the landlord are, what the rights of the tenant are. In many commercial leases, however, most of the work is the tenant's responsibility as far as the maintenance and upkeep of the property. So you're going to have to take a look at the lease. That would be the first place to look.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Our next sort of category of questions has to do with kind of access issues, and that is to say, two of them are very similar. One is where the access is a product of road damage. In one instance, they are up towards Netherland, and the road is intermittently open, and whether one can or should terminate the lease. And the related question too is another property where there's road damage. FEMA has deemed it inaccessible, evacuated due to power on and off, and they have to hike a half-mile in to get into their place. So what impact does that have on ongoing lease obligation? And then the little one that will, well, not a little one, significant one that will add on to the end is somebody's bridge is out on the property and the renter's truck is left high and dry.
I guess the question I have, are all three of these questions from a tenant, or are some of them from a landlord? Because that changes what we might say.
I'm from a tenant. I'm not able to access my house due to the road closures.
I'm a tenant and I'm not able to access, but the landlord is saying that it is safe. But in the Yahoo group online, neighbors are saying it's risky, it's dangerous, you need to hike in.
Yes.
Okay,
And I'm a landlord with that feature.
Okay, couple of questions. For the houses where you have limited access, do you still have all your utilities and plumbing and electricity?
The electricity has been off and on at my place. It was evacuated because the power was out, and now the power's been back on and off. But still had to hike a half mile to a mile to get to the house once you stop at a certain
Okay, what about plumbing and water?
There was no water. They put, after about a week, they put a hand pump for water outside of the house to get water going inside. I only know that because I hiked in after 5 days and saw that.
Well, if there's a plumbing problem or water or electric, that is part of the habitability, warranty of habitability. So you go through the process of giving them the notice,
There's
to-
no lease in mine, it's month to month, and all of September
Well,
was paid, so my
That's still a
question-
lease. It's an oral lease, month to month.
It's month to month. My question is, do they need to refund me? I've only been able to live there for 9 days. Or is it considered habitable as long as I can hike in a mountain road?
Well, I think one of the ways to look at that, it's not really a warranty of habitability issue at that point. It's more of a basic contract question, and you have to look at what you bargained for when you rented the property, and it was probably that you had vehicular ingress and egress to the property. You don't have that, so I think, you know, an argument can be made that because you didn't have that, the purpose of the contract was frustrated and the contract should be canceled. That's just sort of basic contract concepts that could be argued either way. The warranty of habitability, these access issues I find fascinating because, you know, is if you, I'm up on Magnolia, my 7-mile commute is now a 45-mile commute, and if I was a tenant in that situation, you know, and it took me an extra hour and a half to get to work every day, what are my rights and remedies? And unfortunately, unless you guys have any clear answers, it's sort of a case-by-case kind of basis.
I would agree with that. I think there's a corollary contractual principle called impossibility of performance, that if it's simply impossible to perform that contract, which a lease is, that would terminate the contract. But the question is, as Victor said, what if it's not impossible, it's just really, really hard?
Yeah, economics. It's just economics, that's not impossibility of performance.
Yeah, apparently there's some mountain men around that are happy to remain in their cabins up in the mountains without any water. I guess they're gonna be boiling water and shooting deer to stay alive, but most of us couldn't live that way. And, you know, not being able to get to your house without hiking a mile or two, that's not what anybody intended.
I'd die.
What's your name in case I need you?
Are you a CU student?
Me?
Just as a follow-up on that, I'm a tenant. I'm just wondering, in the time that I haven't been able to get to my house, or in the time that I can get to my house, however long that takes, am I responsible for paying rent? I rent a 3-bedroom house in sublease, the other 2 rooms, and those girls are looking at me as sort of a landlord as whether or not we have to pay rent in the situation, and I wanted clarity on what the right thing is. And I live also up past Magnolia, just right there off of 119, so it's, you know, over an hour commute each way. We all work in Boulder, so it's just not feasible. And we have not been let up the canyon at all yet, even with like our residents' IDs.
Have you talked to the landlord about what you could do
I
as
wanted
far as
to.
abating the rent?
I have not yet, but I wanted to find out what my rights were first before having that conversation.
I think the answer to that is there's no real defined rights necessarily. And I absolutely agree with Jack. Communication, talk to your landlord.
Yeah, and it's that time of year where, you know, we've already had snow above 10,000 feet, I heard the other day, so another month or two, that mile hike in is gonna get more and more uncomfortable.
And be, you know, a little bit more definitive, like maybe guidance for you, is that I think, you know, push comes to shove and you went and argued with the judge, they would probably say that you're entitled to some sort of a reduction in your rent. So what you want to do is just talk to the landlord and see what you guys can work out.
And I think we still have the lingering question, what about the truck stuck on the wrong side of the bridge?
We thought you forgot about that.
Because I'm just curious.
That's right.
Yeah, do we have any response?
Can I clarify that?
Yeah, sure.
I can yell. The creek runs through the property. You can park on the one side, we have a bridge that's gone. But the culverts are still there, and some very large rocks. The house is up on the hill, it's high and dry. The fellows, one truck is up there, one is out, free. But they don't want to pay the rent. And they've been using it, but they're clamoring.
Yeah,
I don't know.
they certainly have an obligation to continue to pay rent in that situation. There might be an argument of a diminution of a certain amount of rent. Have you tried to negotiate with them and see if you can work out a deal?
Well, it was just, the only comment is, we're not
so,
That's probably not the right comment or the right thing for them to do. And
I don't think any lawyer would advise them to do that, to say that, you know, take that position.
So if people are evacuated because there is no access and we've already paid for the full month, are we due back to prorated rent when we couldn't get access?
Again, I mean, I think it's a matter of degree. Was it difficult access or was it no access?
Well, somebody came in, I couldn't get backed up, I was turned around by a sheriff.
Yeah, and in
I was
that case,
told-
I think, yeah, it would be.
And then they went in and evacuated other people voluntarily because the power was off and they were concerned about emergency. So some officials went up there and told people to get out. Meanwhile, the roads have been damaged and all this hiking things haven't been back.
Well, I go back to the impossibility of performance.
Right.
For that particular period of time that you have no access whatsoever, yeah, you could not perform the contract for that period.
yes, I agree that, you know, that really factors into it. If you can't get to your property at all, but then at the other, you know, we touched on this earlier, stuff is still up there, so it's not valueless. And so just negotiation is super, super important.
Okay, John Gold.
So we have a kind of a modified situation like this. I have a real good situation with my landlord. We've gotten along really well and been pretty upfront with each other. They live downstairs in the basement area. They got flooded, and we allowed them to live upstairs at our level. This is in Lyons, Colorado, where there's no utilities at all. So, and they've been great. They've been, you know, stripping downstairs where they live and stuff, and trying to take care of everything. And the last time we spoke, we indicated that we both wanted to continue the relationship, but given the situation in Lyons, we didn't know when it would all come back online in terms of utilities. Our space upstairs is completely livable, so we were interested in staying there. The last I spoke to him, like I said, he's interested in keeping us there. There was a comment made by another party involved where she's going, well, we have friends who are homeless, and they would be interested in camping there if you guys don't want to stay there, right? You know, so it's an interesting situation. You know, I think there's probably a lot of folks in Lyons that are in a similar situation. That really, as tenants and landlords, everybody wants to come back and be in the same situation if they had a good relationship in the first place. So, and just to encapsulate what you guys were saying, if I understand correctly, if we can work it out, it sounds like we should talk, we should negotiate. We've got all our stuff up, you know, in our space up there. It sounds like if we paid them some kind of an amount for storage, some kind of reasonable amount in that time, that would be sort of a fair, equitable thing if we can figure out what that is, some kind of reduced rent. Because we're homeless too. we have nowhere to live either. I mean, and I don't have the sanitary conditions in terms of, I was almost willing to go back there if it was just electricity. So I was trying to encapsulate everything that's been said here so far. Because I think there's a lot of people who are in that situation. Do I understand that correctly? Is that where it's at?
Yeah, I think, yeah, that there are these guideposts that we have with regard to the law, but if you guys can work out something that's amenable to all parties, that's so important and the appropriate way to proceed, absolutely.
So at least we would have to necessarily be terminated.
No,
No,
not at all.
if you can work it out among yourselves, even the lawyers think that's a good idea.
Our next question, I think, is actually pretty straightforward. And it is simply, if in the lease it says, quote, if tenant wants to replace the carpet, tenant will pay 50%, unquote. Is the tenant responsible to pay for half the carpet damaged by flood?
No, I don't do that.
That's easy. Well, that was easy. Okay. Easiest question of the evening, which is good.
Anything else to add there?
I want to add something because there was an article in the Daily Camera last week that I think was a little bit misleading. And the warranty of habitability in this natural disaster and natural catastrophe overrides these leases that say that the tenant has to make repairs. This is a totally different issue. So if your contract says the tenant has to pay for the carpet or the tenant has to fix broken pipes, this is all out the window right now. We're talking about habitability, so keep that in mind. that's why that contract provision probably will not be enforced.
And there's an explicit provision in the warranty of habitability that says floors, stairways, and railings maintained in good repair. That's an obligational one.
Henry, please.
So I actually had a question about mediation, but let me describe the situation. On the second day of the rainstorm, we received, I'm a landlord, we received a notice that the place was uninhabitable. 2 weeks later, we got the 5-day notice.